Russian President Vladimir Putin has an insatiable appetite for power. Even if his forces continue to capture land in Ukraine or negotiate a deal that allows them to take full control of certain territories, he'll never stop wanting more, and he'll always have fresh new targets in his sights. And several experts believe they've already identified the next location in Putin's campaign of conquest: Narva, a border city in Estonia with a fascinating past and uncertain future. Fortunately, Estonia is already well aware of the importance Narva holds and the reality of the risks it faces, and is taking all available steps to prepare the city for a possible Russian invasion. On the face of it, Narva, Estonia's third largest city with a population of approximately 54,000 people, may not seem like an obvious target for Russia's forces to attack. Scratch the surface and dig a little deeper, however, and you can start to see the many reasons why Putin could eventually decide to lay claim to this city. Those reasons revolve around Narva's past, present, population, location, and even its economy. To understand them, it's first important to look back at how this city was formed and the interesting changes and events it's endured over the years. Because Narva's history goes back a long way. In fact, people first settled in this area thousands of years ago, and the oldest known settlement in the area, Narva Oru, dates all the way back to 1000 BC, making it the oldest in all of Estonia. The Narva Castle, also known as the Herman Castle, was constructed in 1256 during the Danish rule of northern Estonia. However, the city of Narva itself was first officially recognized as a city in 1329. The castle's foundations were laid in an ideal location at the intersection of several trade routes and besides the rushing waters of the Narva River, and the surrounding settlement soon began to develop. This all occurred at a time when Denmark ruled over northern Estonia, but Narva experienced numerous changes in ownership in the centuries that followed. During the Livonian War of the 16th century, for example, the Tsardom of Russia managed to capture the city, turning it temporarily into an important trading port and transshipment center for Russian goods from nearby Russian cities, such as Novgorod and Pskov. This was Russia's first, but not last involvement in the history of Narva, and it didn't last long. Just a couple of decades after the Tsardom had seized the city, it was conquered all over again, this time by the troops of the Kingdom of Sweden. Russia tried and failed to retake the area, but Sweden managed to hold it for more than a century, contributing greatly to Narva's development during that time. Under Swedish rule, the Baroque old town of Narva was built, for example. And even after a fire ravaged large parts of the city in 1659, old structures were soon replaced, fueled by the increasing trade income the city enjoyed. Sweden also sought to improve the city's defensive structures, constructing a strong system of special fortifications called bastions, which were soon regarded as some of the very best in all of Europe. But Russia always kept a close eye on the city and was desperate to reclaim it by any means necessary. Thus, during the Battle of Narva in 1700, the city was the site of the first great battle between Russian and Swedish forces, with Russia eventually conquering and claiming Narva in 1704. Russia then continued to hold the city well into the 20th century, and Narva continued to grow and prosper, becoming the most important industrial city in all of Estonia, home of the country's first railway and various big businesses. The Second World War proved to be a major turning point in the city's remarkable history. It was taken over by Nazi forces, with the Soviet Red Army eventually being forced to bombard the area, destroying its old town and 98% of its buildings. The Soviet authorities subsequently decided not to rebuild any of the beautiful old buildings that had been destroyed, and also refused to allow the city's original native inhabitants to return to their home. Instead, traditional Soviet apartment blocks were built, and Russian-speaking workers were funneled into the area from various parts of the USSR, turning what had once been a hub of Estonian culture, language, and traditions into a bland and largely Russian-speaking city, similar in atmosphere and aesthetics to so many of others across the Soviet Union. In 1991, the Union collapsed, and Estonia at last regained its independence, but Narva has continued to be home to a large number of Russian speakers and citizens. In this respect, it bears at least some similarity with the Ukrainian region of Crimea, as well as the eastern regions of Ukraine that Putin originally targeted in his 2022 invasion, like Donetsk and Luhansk. For that reason, ever since Russia annexed Crimea in early 2014, fears have gradually risen that the Kremlin could carry out a similar assault on Narva. Various political commentators, journalists, scientists, and military experts have even coined the concept of the so-called Narva scenario, a hypothetical military situation in which Russia attacks one of the small NATO nations, like Estonia, using hybrid warfare tactics similar to those seen in 2014 and the build-up to the 2022 invasion. As the war in Ukraine rumbles on, many of those same experts are sounding the alarm, suggesting that the Narva scenario is becoming increasingly realistic as Putin weighs up his next move and designates the next target for his enormous and ever-expanding army to focus on. Speaking to The Sun, for example, Tim Willesee, a former diplomat and visiting professor of war studies at King's College, warned that Putin's plans for European conquest are far from over. "I don't think for a moment that Putin's project is finished." The expert went on to argue that no matter how the war in Ukraine goes, and even if it comes to an end through some sort of potential peace agreement, the Russian president is already eyeing up additional targets. The one I've always thought is very dangerous is Narva, which has an 80% Russian population. He's not the only one warning that Narva might be next in line for the Kremlin's war machine, and locals have reason to worry, as Putin himself even issued a vague threat towards the city back in 2022. While meeting with young entrepreneurs, engineers and scientists at the Moscow People's Economy Accomplishment Exhibition's Innovation and Education Center, Putin famously compared himself with Russia's legendary emperor Peter the Great, while claiming that Russia had always held dominion over the Estonian city. Peter I waged the Great Northern War for 21 years. It appeared as if he was fighting with Sweden, conquered something. He didn't conquer anything, he took back. That's how it is, in the western direction, meaning Narva, his first invasions. Why did he go there? He took back and secured. That's what he did. Putin went on to say that modern Russians should follow that example, taking back and securing whatever locations they feel belong to them. Alarm bells have been ringing ever since, and it's not hard to see why. There are arguably 5 major reasons Putin could point to as some sort of justification for attacking the Estonian city. The first reason, as Putin himself has pointed out, is Russia's historic ties to Narva. As explained earlier on, Russia has at various times throughout its history held control over this city. The same can be said for various cities across Europe and all across the ages. We've seen different countries, dominions and empires lay claim to varying cities, towns and territories. These days, however, the vast majority of nations around the world respect each other's independence and sovereignty. They don't lay claim to others' countries' territories purely because they owned them in the past. Russia, or at least its leader, tends to see things differently. For Moscow, it appears that any location which has ever been partially occupied by Russian or Soviet forces or people throughout history is fair game to be targeted in the 21st century. This, after all, is partly how Putin has explained his so-called special military operation in Ukraine, arguing that the Donbas region of eastern Ukraine should belong to Russia, while also laying claim to Crimea, and even at one point stating that all of Ukraine is, in his view, Russia's to take. So, it's not difficult to imagine Putin making similar arguments in regard to Narva, given the city's unique history and modern-day associations with Russia. Which leads us on to the second big reason: Narva's vast number of Russian citizens, Russian language speakers, and its cultural connections with Russia as a whole. As Mr. Willesee notes, Narva has a large percentage of Russian citizens living within its boundaries. Exact numbers are hard to come by, and estimates vary, though recent numbers state that the 6% of the city's population are ethnic Estonians. Less than half, around 48% to be exact, are Estonian citizens, while 36% have Russian passports, and 14% fall into the category of undefined citizenship. 97% of the city's population speak Russian, and many are believed to maintain close ties with the country. Indeed, shortly after Estonia acquired its independence in the early 1990s, an unofficial referendum was held regarding the future of Narva and the surrounding areas. Polls at the time suggested that the vast majority of people in those areas opposed secession from Estonia, but the referendum results showed that 97% voted in favour of autonomy despite a mere 55% turnout among Narva residents. Russia can still point to that referendum as a sign that the people of Narva do not wish to be part of Estonia, though there were numerous credible reports of vote rigging at the time. And the vote was ultimately deemed unconstitutional by the Estonian government, with many believing that Moscow had interfered to influence the result. Still, Putin rarely lets facts or the truth interfere with his agenda, and could easily construct a narrative to argue that Narva's people want and need to become part of Russia. The city's mayor, Katri Rake, would strongly disagree. Speaking to the photojournalist Mario Heller for a Chatham House report, Rake argues that Russian soil is mere meters away from Narva's city centre, and if any local residents really wanted to become Russian, they don't have far to travel. Yet very few actually decide to make the journey. Anyone who wants to can move to Russia any time, but no one does because everyone knows that Estonia is a free country. The third reason Russia may see Narva as an attractive target is its location. The Russia-Estonia border extends for 183 miles, 294 kilometers in total. So, theoretically, if Russia wanted to invade Estonia and launch an assault on this small NATO nation, it could choose numerous locations along that line. However, when we look at the border more closely, it's clear to see that Russia's options are limited, as many miles of the border run not across land, but across bodies of water, like the Narva Reservoir, the Narva River itself, and the vast Lake Peipus, which is the largest transboundary lake in all of Europe and the fifth biggest lake in Europe overall, covering a whopping 1,373 square miles or 3,555 square kilometers. Getting a large invasion force, including tanks, armoured vehicles, artillery and other assets, across a massive lake or reservoir is an extremely challenging task. As such, any Russian invasion of Estonia would have to be orchestrated along the land-based sections of the border, making Narva the most obvious target. There is still the Narva River to cross here, but there's already a large bridge connecting the Estonian city to its Russian neighbour, Ivangorod. However, the bridge was closed by Estonian authorities and will remain shut until the war in Ukraine ends. The Estonian side has also installed gates and barriers to enhance security. Russia could also make use of the large E20 highway, which runs all the way to the Estonian capital of Tallinn in the west, connecting it directly to the major Russian city of St. Petersburg to the east. This would be ideal for the Kremlin's forces to transport troops and military vehicles towards Narva quickly and efficiently. From a logistical perspective, therefore, an invasion of Narva wouldn't necessarily be too difficult for Moscow to organise. There is, however, one big question mark around any assault on Narva, and that's the fact that Estonia is part of the NATO alliance. And all members of the NATO alliance are obligated to defend one another in case of any attack or invasion. And this leads us on to the fourth reason Russia might try to attack. Putin may believe that Narva is simply not significant enough to trigger a wide-scale NATO response, and some experts fear that this argument holds weight. In his Sun interview, for example, Willesee expressed concern that the US and potentially other major NATO nations wouldn't be all that willing to possibly provoke a global conflict or full-scale war with Russia purely to save Narva. Do we really believe that the United States is going to go to war for one town in Estonia? I'm not sure I do anymore. At a time when the NATO alliance is coming under increasing strain, these fears are not necessarily unfounded. While it's easy to imagine NATO allies rallying to defend a large-scale invasion of a member state, they may not all be quite as willing to scramble jets and deploy troops if Putin argues he only wants to take a single city. This would tie into the Kremlin's recent strategy of poking and prodding at NATO's borders, sending small amounts of drones or even Russian jets into the likes of Polish and Estonian airspace. These kinds of provocations aren't quite big enough to trigger a serious military response, and so they allow Moscow to learn more about where NATO's limits really lie and how strong its bonds truly are. The fifth and final reason to target Narva is that even though it may seem like a relatively small and insignificant city on the outside, it actually holds quite notable economic importance. It's the home of Europe's largest rare earth magnet factory, which opened in September 2025 and was funded by the European Union. The plant produces permanent magnets for use in important economic sectors such as microelectronics, wind turbines for green energy initiatives, and electric vehicles. It's an important addition to the European economic landscape, as it greatly enhances the continent's capacities in the rare earth sector and allows the EU to reduce its reliance on China. Should Russia invade and seize control of the city, it could potentially find a way to use this factory as leverage in any subsequent negotiations with NATO or the EU. Because of all these reasons and others, Estonian officials and Narva residents have been readying themselves for a Russian invasion for several years, and the country's opposition to Russia has risen dramatically in recent times. As the Chatham House report notes, this small Baltic nation has been one of Ukraine's biggest and most reliable supporters from day one of the invasion, providing Kyiv with more military aid in relative terms than any other country on earth. Within Narva itself, recent times have also seen more locals take an active interest in the Kaitse Elite, Estonia's voluntary defense army. Many members of the younger generation have opted to enlist and undergo basic military training in preparation for an invasion. They can get involved from as young as 7 years old, first learning basic survival skills in scout-style groups like map reading and surviving in the wilderness, before progressing to more advanced skills later on. Chatham House spoke to one such volunteer, 17-year-old Maria Morozova, who expressed her willingness to learn valuable skills and get ready for the worst-case scenario. "Nobody lured me here, I came of my own accord. I wanted to join a more serious organisation where I could contribute and, if necessary, defend the country." She's part of a growing wave of young Estonians who are politically aware and proud of their home, ready to do whatever is necessary to defend it. "No one loves war, I hope it doesn't come to that, but if it does, I would fight." But Estonia is doing much more than relying on young men and women to defend its borders. It's also ramping up fortifications along the length of its border with Russia, focusing on areas that are deemed most likely to be targeted in an invasion, such as Narva. Following the examples of other Baltic states and European countries like Poland, which have all also been working on improving their defences, Estonia has invested heavily in the likes of bunkers, border surveillance systems and forward defence measures, turning Narva from what may have once appeared an easy target into one of the most closely monitored and strongly secured border points in all of Europe. The new defences include over 60 miles, or 100 kilometres of new border fences, much of which are equipped with state-of-the-art surveillance systems, patrolled roads and monitoring masts, allowing Estonia's military and leadership to keep a close eye on any suspicious activities or signs of military activity along the length of its border with Russia. Construction is ongoing in the most sensitive areas, like the Saatse region, where roads linking Estonian and Russian territory have been permanently closed and rerouted, and radar coverage along the Narva River is expanding all the time, broadening Tallinn's view of not only its territory but the surrounding Russian regions too. In addition to the fences, Estonia is also hard at work on its Baltic defence line, an entire network of reinforced bunkers, anti-tank obstacles, and other physical barriers that wouldn't just delay an invasion but could completely stop it in its tracks. By 2027, Estonia wants to have 600 of these concrete bunkers built, each one specially designed to withstand heavy artillery shelling and fully integrated with mobile units, drones and fire support teams. With such strong defences, Even a relatively small nation like Estonia, with a military that's a mere fraction of the size and strength of Russia's, would be able to defend its border much more effectively, making any attempted invasion an incredibly costly and chaotic one for the opposing side. And Estonia isn't stopping there. The country is not only hitting NATO targets, but exceeding them. It's now spending close to 5% of its GDP on defense, well ahead of many other member nations, and it's using that money effectively to fund ammunition stockpiles, invest in high-end air defense systems, and purchase missiles, drones, and more. It also enjoys plenty of support from NATO allies, with a UK-led battle group permanently stationed on Estonian soil, and Tallinn is exploring additional ways to bolster its defences, including organising large-scale military exercises, reserve call-ups, and host nation support infrastructure, ensuring that allied units are ready to operate and activate as soon as possible should any kind of crisis emerge. As Hanno Pevkur, Estonia's defence minister, puts it, the aggressor must know that if they try to cross the border, they will die here. Now, you can learn more about how Estonia is gearing up to give Russia the surprise of its life if its forces dare approach its borders in this video. Or check out this video to see how size doesn't always matter, as one of Estonia's smallest missiles could give Russia a massive problem. And make sure to subscribe to our channel to continue hearing about the latest military news, developments, and analysis of new weapons, defences, and innovations from around the world.